Hi, it's Cara and welcome to my July wrap up. So I read a lot of books in July. Actually I didn't. I read like less than I did the last couple months. I read just 31, which is still a fuck ton. And it feels like years ago since I read some of these from the start of the month. So I'm just gonna do my best to talk you through my ratings. And we'll talk about all the books I read in the month. So let's go. I started off the month by reading The Mermaid, the Witch and the Sea by Maggie Takuta Hall. This is a, how can I say it? Like a colonial inspired, like, no, better way. This is a diverse fantasy following, our main character's name is, there's Flora and Evelyn is from a family that is it kind of reads like Imperial Japan, though I'm not really sure. I haven't researched the like meaning, like what all the countries are meant to represent, but it's something akin to Imperial Japan. And then Flora is a peasant from an African inspired country, and her brother ended up as the youngest crew on this pirate ship, and she pretends to the crew to be a boy, was how she got on the ship. So ultimately she's, I would say, gender fluid or gender queer. She uses both pronouns and identifies as both pronouns in a fluid shift, so gender fluid or otherwise gender queer, but uses she pronouns in her own dialogue most of the time, she her pronouns. And then Evelyn is like gets kind of caught up on this pirate ship. There's slave trade in this as part of the pirate stuff going on, so if that's going to be a problem for you, do go into it knowing slavery is a big component in the like world building of this, though you don't see much actual like slave labor. But the pirate ship that Flora is a part of takes rich people from various different areas, and then they're thinking it's just a transport ship, but then they sell them on to a slave trade, so it's rich people being sold into slavery, I guess. This features mermaids, witches, as implied in the title. It has a really interesting narrative structure. It's got 3 parts, and each part kind of has almost a full arc. So the pacing might not work for some people. I ended up giving this a 4 stars because the pacing did slow it down a little for me, but I really liked the characters, and the relationship between Evelyn and Florian was really well developed in my opinion. And if you're worried about the representation, I can't obviously talk to it, but I'm pretty confident that Maggie Takuta Hall is has Japanese heritage, I think. This is, yeah, very culturally diverse, but I obviously can't speak to the quality of the representation. I would like to hear, I've heard from some own voices reviews, like Charlie Jane Anders, who is trans, I think. She talked on the quality of it and really enjoyed it. So I think the genderqueer representation is done pretty well from own voices reviews I've read. I think it's a little bit of an underrated gem. It hasn't got much hype, which is one of the reasons I read it. And I got this as part of my LGBTQ+ subscription service. And Dahlia recommended it as an underhyped, diverse read. And I definitely think it is that. I don't think it will work for everyone, but I think it has something really special, especially in the writing and the character dynamics. And the world is really descriptive and lush. So I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars, but yeah, do be aware slavery is a key element to the world, I should say. Next up, I read The Stormcrow by Kaylin Josephson. I ended up giving this a 3 stars. This just didn't quite work as good for me. This is a Caribbean inspired, or at least like tropical fantasy following crow riders. I listened to this on audiobook. For me, it just, I hate to say this, but like it read like a debut. Like the world building was a little bit too heavy-handed. I liked the characters, but they also felt sometimes out of character. Like our main character is meant to have depression, but that, like, has depression, not meant to have, has depression. But to me, that wasn't always, like, I guess you can't say how depressed people should act. Like, that's bad also. But, I don't know, sometimes things would happen and I'd kind of forget that was the characterization she was meant to have. And then it would suddenly get, like, heavy-handedly reminded. And it just, like, didn't quite work for me. It was fun, but I didn't love it. I don't know if I'm going to read book 2. I'm undecided currently, but I gave this a 3 stars. Then I read Dark Whispers, which is the sequel to Brightstorm by Vashti Hardy. This is a middle grade adventure story, which is interesting in reflection because it really does look at some of the negative impacts of colonialism, but in an accessible to children way to me. Like, it's very much like an adventure story, so it has a lot of like exploring unknown areas, but this one especially talks about like the impact of people going into an area. The first one didn't quite have. The first one's focus in that regard was more on like the impact on animals and wildlife, and this was the impact on other human cultures. So that was really interesting to read, though I can't speak to the quality of the representation of the diverse cultures in this. They obviously are made up to an extent, as made up as anything else can be, but I don't know that, like, how good that is. I don't know. I gave this a 4 stars. I did enjoy my time reading it. It was fun. I'll definitely pick up more in this series in the future. One of the main characters is disabled. He has only one arm, and yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. And then we hit the Becca's Bookopothon, and I read the next 7 things, I think. Yeah, I think I finished the next 7 things during Becca's Bookopothon. So the first one is The Falconer by Elizabeth May. This is a Celtic fae story. Our main character is a falconer, which means she hunts and kills fae, and it's very much like a Buffy if it was set in 1800s Scotland, and it's got that like Hellmouth kind of vibes. She's hunting these fae, and the Hellmouth is kind of like, it's not a Hellmouth, but it's they call it the Mound, I think, is spilling out fae and like demonic kind of creatures, like fae, but like not just like fairy the way we think of them in our Western current modern YA setting. Much more dark and monstrous, and there's a dark relationship between her and a fae, and then also her childhood friend is a seer, and the two of them are in a arranged marriage because they were caught in circumstances which meant for the time they were like pushed to get married. So there's a like a dark romance as well as like a marriage of convenience, I guess, that's going on in this little love triangle. I can't wait to read more of this series. I do have the second book on the way to me. Yeah, I think it's gonna be real fun. I did really enjoy this first one, and I ended up giving it a 4 stars, but I think it was great fun, really memorable. Also, Elizabeth May is autistic, and she's had, I remember reading a thread from her about how people found that her dialogue and relationships felt weird to them, but it was because it's through an autistic lens. I actually personally really enjoyed it. I don't know what that says about me, but it really worked for me. Like, it was funny and sarcastic, and it just clicked. It was so good. I really enjoyed this. It was so much fun. Then my first 5-star of the month, I read Clapham New Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a contemporary told in verse following these 2 sisters Yahaira and Kamina, and they didn't know they were sisters until their dad dies in a plane crash, and then it all kind of comes to light. This was beautiful. I read it in one sitting on the Saturday evening, I think. Like I slammed through it. I loved it. I listened to the audiobook as well, and that was really well done. Like I read along to the audiobook, and oh, it was just so good. So good. I would definitely recommend this, especially if you've enjoyed her previous work. It is just as good, if better, if not better than her previous works. It was so good. I read a short story called Knowledgeable Creatures. Do I have my phone on me? I can't remember the author's surname, but my phone is way over there. You'll see it up here. This is a short horror? No, it was a mystery. A short sci-fi mystery from Tor.com novellas, or short stories, or Tor.com short story. And follows like a world where there's sentient animals, and we're following a sentient dog who is a detective. And some things going on. It's really short. It was really interesting. I ended up giving it a 4 stars. It was very bizarre, but I did really enjoy it. So that's that one. And then we had another 5 stars, which was You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. This is a YA contemporary. It's not a romance, I don't think. Or at least, no, it is. What am I talking about? It's a romance. It's a sapphic romance. We follow Liz, who is really smart, and she's got accepted into the college that she wants, but she doesn't know how she's going to pay for it. She doesn't get the scholarship she was hoping for. And so instead she decides to run for prom queen, because at her school, whoever wins prom court has like scholarship to the school of their choice, which seems very extra to me, but apparently it's pretty normal, like relatively common, that schools go like fully all out for prom, which isn't like, we don't even have prom here, but it seems like very intense to me. But she's obviously like not prom queen material. Like not only is she one of the few non-white people at her school, she's also like kind of tomboyish. She's into girls, and it's all, she just is not what they expect from prom queen. And it's kind of her journey there, and her relationship with, what is her girlfriend's name? Amanda, who is also pretty tomboyish and is also running for prom queen because her family is like a legacy kind of thing, like her mom was prom queen, or ran for prom queen. Yeah, this was so fun. It's so good. I listened to the audiobook of this and it was just like perfect. The audiobook was so well narrated. I loved it. It was just fun, and there was drama, but it wasn't like over the top. Liz's mum and brother both have sickle cell. Her mum died of sickle cell, I think. So if you were interested in reading something with that kind of perspective, I know sickle cell is like very much predominantly a black condition because of its genetic propensity in malaria-ridden countries. So if that's something like you are interested in reading more about, that is in here. And like the health stuff around that with her brother, that's like one of the tension things she's dealing with. It's got a lot of social media in exploration, a really interesting friend group dynamic. It was just really, really good. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. I also read Fate of the Fallen by Kel Cade. I listened to the audiobook for this one as well. This is a adult fantasy, kind of following the idea of a chosen one trope, where the chosen one then dies and his best friend is trying to like take up the mantle because he can't let it go. This was fun. It's not that long. It's only just over 300 pages. It was very sassy. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I didn't absolutely love it, but I really liked that throughout he's carrying, so our main character is what's his name Asler, who's the best friend, and he's carrying around his best friend Matthias's head because he has, so originally he has to prove like that the chosen one has died. So he cuts off his head and it's like magically preserved, and he carries it around in a bag to take to the king so that the king will like decide what to do. And he's just carrying around his head, but he's going a little nuts and it's talking to him. And so there's all this dialogue between him and the head. And that's so funny to me. All the characters were hilarious. It kind of had like a Terry Pratchett, but more like less out there. So like the sarcasm and stuff was very Terry Pratchett, but like Terry Pratchett is also absolutely nuts and is way more about like reflecting on random cultural elements. This didn't have that, but it just had the sarcasm and funniness in the fantasy setting, which I really enjoy. So I gave this 4 stars. I will continue with the series, but it was kind of lacking in, I don't know, like, I don't even know, it just was not perfect. It's like the world building was interesting. I guess it is very manly from a main perspective. Like there is like random sex scenes that kind of happen. It's, yeah, despite being written by a woman, I don't know, it just has something about that just kind of, like it's got very like I'm a fantasy man vibes, you know what I mean? Like, but also the women were also funny and had a lot of agency. It was good, just wasn't perfect for me. I ended up giving it a 4 stars, though I'm thinking I like it more on reflection than I did when I came straight out of it. Then I read Bloom by Kevin Panetta and Savannah Ganesho. This is a graphic novel following 2 teens, Ari, who wants to move to the big city. His family own a bakery and he's meant to take it over, but he really is like pushing at the edges. He doesn't really want to. And then there's Hector, who really wants to be baking, but like takes up a job there. Things kind of happen. They have a little romance between the two of them. It's really sweet. I ended up giving this 5 stars. I think it's just like a perfect sweet graphic novel. It's just all the tensions of like ending high school and what you're doing in the next steps. Like Hector's a little older, so it's like his summer job while he's away from culinary school. It's just, oh, it was really good. I gave it 5 stars. And also for the Book-a-thon, the final book I read was A Phoenix First Must Burn by Patrice Caldwell, or edited by Patrice Caldwell, which is a collection of Black Girl Magic stories. I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. It's one of the better collections that I've read. It was just nearly every story really worked for me. There were only a couple I wasn't a fan of, which just are like, just had tropes I'm not a fan of. Like for me, sci-fi has to be a specific type of sci-fi, and this kind of had sci-fi it was my fave. But overall, I really enjoyed it. It was really fun and really weird, and I loved it. Like, so creative and out there, and none of your classic like average fantasy tropes. It was so well constructed, so well put together. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read Arusha on the Song of Death, which is the 2nd book in the Pandava Quartet by Roshni Chokshi. This is a middle grade series following Aru, who is her and her friends are like the descendants of the Pandava brothers, which is a famous story that from the Mahabharata, and it was just like exploring all the gods and the relationship between the gods and things. And this is like this is of the Rick Riordan Presents series, this is the most Percy Jackson-esque, I would say. It's like they can do Percy Jackson, which I really enjoy. It was super fun, and I can't wait to continue this series. Absolutely loved this. It was just a blast. I gave it 4 stars. And then I read probably one of my favorite books for the month, and that is A Song of Wraiths and Ruin by Roseanne A. Brown. This is a West African fantasy following 2 main characters are Malik and Karina. And Karina is the princess for this kingdom, and she finds out that her ancestors kind of gave up a part of themselves to protect this city that they live in and rule over, and because of what they gave up, they can't, her and her family can't leave the city. And then we're also following Malik, who's a immigrant to the city from a rural area that is kind of being quashed under political turmoil. So he's kind of like a political refugee to the city. And then Karina's mother dies, and she's taking on the role of the queen, but there's all these political coup things kind of happening behind the scenes where they're trying to keep her from her power. She's desperately trying to resurrect her mother using some dangerous magic because she feels like she's not prepared to be queen. Malik's trying to kill Karina to save his little sister because he kind of got caught up with an evil spirit, and it's just such good tension. Like, all of the characters are out to kill each other, but they're all for reasons. Like, everything is so well developed, the characters are so interesting and carefully considered, and they're all just like at odds with each other, but they have this yearning for each other. Oh, it's so good. And everything is just like, I often talk about in fantasy novels, what frustrates me is when things don't feel like the next logical step or the inevitable step. Like, there was no other option, this was the option. And this is what this had. The stakes were always so high that it always felt like the only option forward was this option, even when it's like chaotic and catastrophic and gonna have such bad circumstances. The ironic tension in here, like the dramatic irony of like knowing what the other character knows and knowing like it's just so good. The magic system is really interesting and is based on the day of the religious system is based on the day of the week you were born. You have like a patron god for the day of the week you were born on. And then the magic system is involving like spirits and earth, and it's just so good. And there's a magical tournament, and it's just got so many good elements. I can't wait to read the sequel. I believe it's just a duology. Does it say somewhere? But it was so good. If you want to read any YA fantasy of the year, make it this one. It is just your perfect YA fantasy. Like, fresh, interesting, such good tension. The tension is there from start to finish, and it's just so well done, and the writing style is beautiful. 5 stars, obviously. I want to rave about this and push it in everyone's hands. Next up, I read Morning Star by Pierce Brown, which I gave 3 stars, and it's probably the last Pierce Brown I will read. I think I've already put it on my on hold pile, the 4th book, which I had picked up secondhand. This wrapped up nicely, and I didn't enjoy books 2 and 3 in the series enough, I think, to read the second trilogy. This is a sci-fi series focusing on like class dynamics. I enjoyed this. It had some really good emotional moments, but overall I just don't care enough about the series. It's all very dramatic, and individual people feeling like they can change the world when you know that's not true. It's a lot of power games and mental gymnastics, and I don't know. I listened to the audiobook for this one because I was just desperate to get it over and done with. But I did enjoy it, but I didn't love it. I gave it 3 stars. This series is interesting. Siri, calm down. This series is interesting, but it tries to feel it, to me it feels like individual solutions to a societal problem, and I don't think it's effective. But also, like, I don't know how you would do that in a book. I don't know. I just, the world is so expansive. Everything is against the characters. Everything's it's like systematic oppression in place, but then these characters are trying to individually overcome it. I don't know. Very high, fast-paced action. So if that's the kind of thing you like, I think you'll enjoy this series. But I loved the first one, but I feel like book 2 and 3 just aren't up to the same standard as the first one. But it was good. It was a 3 stars. Then I read The Black Veins by Ashaya Monet. This is a new adult urban fantasy, I guess you could say. We follow this world that looks very similar to ours, except a portion of the population are wizards, I guess. And they have magic, and we follow Blythe, who is from a magic family, but she's one of 7 guardians. The magician's powerful enough to cause worldwide panic, but she doesn't know she has powers, like she hasn't come into them yet. But right at the start of the novel, she gets like mind controlled by someone with magic, and nearly kills herself under mind control, like nearly jumps off the roof, but her dad like saves her at the last minute. And so they're trying to protect her and these other guardians from this control of this dark group of magicians, and then her family gets kidnapped. So the like good side are meant to be taking all the guardians in to keep them protected, but she's trying to go after her family. So as they round up different guardians, this is mostly like a we're getting the band together kind of book where they're rounding up all the different guardians, and she's trying to go save her family and like break free from the good guys to go save her family. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. There's like no, well, there's a little bit of very kind of like gentle flirting between some of the side characters in this, but this is, as it says on the back, a no love interest road trip fantasy adventure, and I did really enjoy it. I liked all the characters. I thought it was so fun and funny. She's a teenager, but also like it doesn't shy away from like actual teenage experience. Like there's a bit of drug use, a lot of swearing. It talks about what it means to be a teenager in America at this time, and it's such a diverse range of characters and different experiences, and I don't know, it was really good. It was really well developed for an indie published, like not even indie published, it's self-published book. I thought it was really well developed and well thought out, and I definitely can't wait to read book 2 in the series. It was just really fun. It did have maybe a little bit of pacing issues. Why am I not in focus? What's it focusing on? It did have a little bit of pacing issues, but very subtle. Like just sometimes I'd be like, oh, this is like dragging on a tiny bit in a few spots. But overall I really enjoyed this, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Maybe at the Intersection by Rebecca Lim and Amberlynn Queen Molina. This is a collection of short stories, poetry and non-fiction from Australian authors from a range of backgrounds, including First Nations, people of colour, people with disabilities, and LGBTQ plus people. And this is really good. Each of the stories is very short, but I really like how they are really powerful in their portrayal of experiences, and such a diverse collection. And they also feel inherently very Australian, which I enjoyed. I especially liked a lot of the Indigenous Australian stuff. And there was a story here that explored like what it was like what it would be like to, I think it's actually non-fiction, talking about the struggles of systemic like difficulties in getting work in Aboriginal communities, or as an Aboriginal person in a white community, almost like all those systemic barriers that aren't just about like, it's not just get a job. You have to be able to know that what a resume is, like be educated enough to produce and write a resume and have somewhere to print it and have someone to take you into a place to drop it off, and all these kind of steps in the process, that there are so many barriers where things can fall apart. That was a really powerful story. It also talked a lot about, like, especially in the sections of voices of disabled people, talked a lot about like the hero narrative and how like harmful that can be. Yeah, overall I just really enjoyed this collection. I thought there were so many great stories, and I would definitely recommend it if you can get your hands on it. Then I read Tilly and the Lost Fairy Tales by Anna James, which is the second Pages & Co. book. This follows Tilly going into fairy tales, and things are going wrong. Like in the first book they talked about how fairy tales are not the best things to travel into because they're very adaptive, so they're not very stable. But this was so fun, yes! So there's like lots of danger involved with going into fairy tales. We get to see more of Tilly's mum, who we were introduced to in the first book, and we get to see kind of some of the nuances of book wandering. This is a middle grade series. It's just really sweet and cute. I love it. And honestly, I can't fault it. I listened to the audiobook for this. It's fun and fast paced and it's so good. Gave it 5 stars. Next up, I read The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden. This is the sequel to The Bear and the Nightingale, which I read last year, I think, and really enjoyed. I also really enjoyed this. I think it's very different. Like, apparently each book in this series kind of looks at a different part of Vasia's life and some very different themes. This one was kind of focusing on the idea of breaking free from the home, being a traveller, but we also have a big storyline around the main character Vasia dressing as a boy to survive. There was a big like battle. Oh, I don't know. I don't want to spoil too much and give too much away, but it was just so fun. This was more set in the cities than in the first book that was very much set in the wilderness, like in a tiny remote village. But yeah, oh, this was so good. It dealt a lot with like the constraints of being a woman in the time, and magic. And if you enjoyed The Bear and the Nightingale, you'll definitely enjoy this. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, and I'm really excited to read Winter of the Witch, which is also on its way to me. I think I'm gonna really enjoy it, and yeah, this is a very good series. I like it a lot. Next up, I read The Dragon Prophecy, which is the 4th and final book in the Dragonology series of novels, the middle grade novels. This like fully wrapped up the series. It was so good. If you've ever seen or read the Dragonology books, there's essentially a novelization of some of the key elements of those. And they're kind of, yeah, just a story about how dragons are represented in Dragonology. Like if you've read it, you know the kind of representation of dragons it portrays. And this was these are illustrated, which is great. And this was the 4th and final one, and it was good. I gave it 4 stars. I'm glad I've finished one of a series that's been on my shelf for a long time. Then I read 2 short stories by Mary Robinette Kowal. The first one is Articulated Restraint, which I gave 4 stars. Both of these are set in the Lady Astronaut series. This one is a short story that I think takes place overlapping one of the other stories, but kind of like off to the side. And we're talking about so this is all like space race kind of plot. There was the overall plot of the series. This is a meteor hit Earth, and it was anticipated that the Earth would be uninhabitable in 50 years, kind of, or 20 years or something. So the space race is rushing to get colonies on other planets for when Earth inevitably becomes uninhabitable. And this one is following a little side mission where something went wrong, I think, as a plane was in orbiting or like meeting up with the space station, and so they're on Earth trying to run through possible recovery options in the dive pool to like test out the equipment and stuff and what would be good options before they're trying to do it actually in space. It was really interesting but quick, so it was fun. It was 4 stars. And then the other one was The Lady Astronaut of Mars, which was, I think, the original story that then the rest of the series got based around. And then this one was also 4 stars. It looks at, I think it's after book 2, like between book 2 and 3. So book 1 was set on Earth getting to the moon. I think book 2 is the moon getting to Mars, I think, though I haven't read book 2 yet, so don't hold me to that. And this is when the main character is on the moon? On Mars? On the moon? Oh, maybe Mars, I can't remember. But she's much older. Her husband is now like almost palliative. He's like really going downhill. And they've got this mission that is kind of setting up a fast track to another solar system, I guess. So it would be her going somewhere to then like pop a gate backwards and forwards. But they don't want to send any young people. They need to send an experienced pilot they don't want to send anyone too young because there's a high risk of radiation, so you don't want to send someone who's going to then have lots of cancers. That it's young where she's older, so if she gets sick she's already old, like that kind of thing. And she's like has always wanted, like, she was a pilot, she got there, but she kind of got shunted and retired pretty quickly from piloting because the whole way she convinced them to send her up was they were sending women as to start the colony. So it's still dealing with a lot of like 50s, so it's kind of much earlier than the actual, like it kind of was an accelerated space race. There's still a lot of carryover of like women's roles in things. So it is like pushing at that, and yeah, it was good. It was quick, short, it was fun. So that was also 4 stars. Then I read Shadow Black by Sebastian de Castell, which is the second book in the Spellslinger series. This series is so hard for me to talk about because I both love and hate it. I don't like Callan as a main character. I think he's very awful to the people he meets, and I know it's meant to be like a learning journey of his, but I feel like it's not really, like, he doesn't get criticized for half his thoughts anywhere near enough. But I love these covers, and I kind of want to buy and read them all just to collect the covers. Is that selfish of me? I listened to the audiobook of this and it was interesting. I might continue the series. I'm so torn. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it was fun. I like that we're learning more and more of the world with each book. It's not like overloaded, and I like that. It was fun, interesting. Just Callan is a real asshole, and he learns things, but he doesn't really get called out. If that makes sense. Like the first book, he had some very fatphobic things going on. He's just really critical of everyone else for like no reason. I don't know. I gave it 3 stars. That wasn't obvious. I enjoyed the plot and the world, but I hate the characters. And then I read The Dawn Chorus by Samantha Shannon. This is a short story set between book 3 and 4 of the Bone season. So this is like a novella before the 4th one comes out. I really enjoyed this. It's a little longer for a novella, which I appreciate, and it is dealing with the aftermath and the PTSD that Paige has had from book 3. And yeah, I thought it was really well developed. It also had kind of different perspectives of some things that happened in book 1. And yeah, it was just really good. One of the best novellas I've read. I gave it 4 stars. I just can't give a novella 5 stars, like very rarely. But it was really, really well developed, and I'm really interested to see where book 4 goes. So Bone season, I don't want to go much more into it's an alternate history series where I can't remember which king, but it was during a reign in Britain where suddenly the spirit world got blown wide open, so there's a whole heap of clairvoyants who access the spirit world, and so it's like an alternate history fantasy. Yeah, it's really good. Then I read Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, which was his first Cosme novel. This is high fantasy, following a couple of characters. We follow, oh crap, what is the main character's name? There's Raoden, who is a prince who, essentially there's this city and there's a big city that was there, and oh, it's confusing. 10 years ago this city collapsed, and previously everyone had, like, you would have an ascension moment where you became an Elantrian, where you would kind of become magical and you'd get silvery skin, but then there was the fall of Elantris, and that was 10 years prior to the events of this novel, and suddenly everyone turned into like zombie-like creatures, where they didn't age, but if you wounded them, like if an Elantrian gets wounded, they just can't heal from any of those wounds, so they just get more and more in pain, and they're always hungry. It's like the metabolism entirely stopped. And then all the remaining like non-Elantrians formed their own little like medieval very commerce based society. And then there's another country, I guess, and religion that are coming in and trying to convert everyone. So we follow like a priest from that religion that are coming in to aggressively convert, and it really looks into like the machinations behind religious conversion, which I thought was really interesting, especially considering Brandon Sanderson is a Mormon and how that played in. And then we follow the prince who becomes an Elantrian and ends up one of these like zombie people, and he's trying to bring society to inside elantris. And then we also follow, what is the girl's name? Why am I confusing? Serene. And Serene is from a neighboring city, state, and she was betrothed to the prince, but before she gets there to marry him, he's already turned into an elantrian. And she's trying to navigate the city, the commerce-based city, and she's also kind of at odds with the priest guy. I liked all the moving elements of this. It has a romance that I really thought was unnecessary. It kind of took away from it, which is probably the one thing I didn't appreciate. But I really liked all the, I think something Brandon Sanderson does really well is interesting magic systems, and this was one. It was really cool. And also politics. I think he handles really well in a way that seems really genuine and well thought out, but also super interesting. Yeah, so the politics of this world was really cool. The magic system was great. I liked all the characters, but I just didn't like that romance. I thought it kind of cheapened the female character, whereas before that she had a very, like, everything was good except for her obsession with, she kind of lost a bit of agency because she was obsessed with fitting in. She was very intelligent, had a very political mind, but so she had this idea that everyone was intimidated by her and they respected her, but she didn't feel like one of them, and that was something she'd always experienced. And that kind of thing of like wanting to dumb herself down to fit in really cheapened her for me. But everything else was really well done. Like, I just wish that element wasn't there. Otherwise I loved this. I gave it 3 stars because I do think it's not his best, and that really cheapened it. But the magic system and stuff was really good. Then I read a couple of short stories by Brandon Sanderson. So I read The Hope of Elantris, which is a little short story set like during the main conflict of Elantris, but following some different characters and a different perspective of what's happening. I enjoyed that. I gave it 3 stars. I also read The 11th Metal, which is a Mistborn short story following Kelsier, like before the events of the first Mistborn book, and I enjoyed that one too. Both of them were pretty simple and short, and I gave them 3 stars. This is Arcanum Unbounded, which is a collection of his short stories, longer novellas and things, and they were both in here, so I'm holding this up. But I'm definitely going to be reading more out of here, but all the rest are kind of long, so I will get to them at some point. Then we had my only DNF for the month, and that was The Dark Tide by Alicia Jasinska. Alicia is an Australian author, and I really wanted to push through and continue this, but I was a bit slumpy, and it just was not working for me. This is a island fantasy with witches, and the witches are like, I don't know. My problem with this is that the world building was all over the place. I didn't really understand how the world was built and developed. It made it really hard for me to connect to the characters. This is apparently sapphic, and I could see where it was going with that, but the world building was just all over the place and I was really struggling. And apparently people really like the writing style, but for me it wasn't working. So I ended up DNFing it at like 100 and something pages in, 120-ish. But yeah, you might like this. Try it out, see how you're going with the world building in the first 50 or so pages, because I think some people could really like this, especially if world building is not as critical to your reading experience. But for me, things would be introduced and it would build a certain picture in my head, and then something else would directly conflict that. So just some of the choices that were made, I don't know, you know how you make a choice in your world building and that one thing implies more than just that one thing? Like all the connotations that come with that one thing imply more about your world than just the one thing you introduce. So this would introduce things like that, but then would conflict. So all the things you imply from that one thing get conflicted with other things that are introduced. Overall, I just kind of struggled with this. And my camera light is flashing, and we've got 3 things more to go. So let's get going. Well, more than 3. Next up, I read The Book of M by Peng Shepard. I listened to this on audiobook. This is a post-apocalyptic story where people lose their shadows, and their shadows still their memories, so then they start losing their memories. This was weird. I had a really bad experience because there were 2 different audiobooks available on Scribd. one of them is messed up and it kind of jumps all over the place and isn't very consistent. But this doesn't have chapter titles, so like chapter numbers, so it was hard to keep track of where I was, and it took me a while to realize, like I was like 200 pages in before I realized I'd missed parts and it was going all over the place, so I had to start back quite a bit ways to figure out what was happening. Eventually got on track. I did enjoy it, but it was very literary, which I should have known going into it, but so it was a little dry at parts and it was very much a left-hanging ending. So I enjoyed it, but it was a 4 stars, I think. Then I read Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Power. I also gave this 4 stars. This is a small town fantasy, not even fantasy, creepy horror. We're following a girl who grew up with just her and her mum in an abusive relationship, and then she finds out she has a grandmother, so she goes in search of that grandmother, and then things are going weird, and there's a body of a girl that looks just like her, and it's her kind of trying to figure out everything that's going on. This lost a star for me because the pacing in the middle was a bit slow. It took her a long time to find things out, and I feel like the intensity and the tension there just kind of would get relaxed a little, and I wanted it to kind of be higher tension the whole time. But the twists were really good, and the ending was really interesting, so it's got a 4 stars. And then I listened to Tweet Cute by Emma Lord, which is a YA contemporary following 2 teens on either side of a Twitter war between a burger chain and a like little home-owned deli, and then there's kind of a little romance between them, but it's mostly about their high school experience and next steps and things like that. It was fun. I didn't love it. I didn't relate super well to the characters. I listened to this on audiobook. It was alright. I gave it 3 stars. And then penultimate book, Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This is a Mexican horror haunted house story. Our main character goes to see what's up with her cousin, who sent a weird letter saying there's like voices in the walls and stuff, so she goes to try and see what's happening in this like remote house. Her cousin married a white man, and they haven't really heard from her since, so then she goes to visit her at this house and things go down. It was super creepy. I gave it, what did I end up giving it? A 4 stars. It was really weird, but it kind of had a nicely wrapped up ending, like as in a too nicely wrapped up ending, so I didn't quite love the ending, but the twists and turns and the eeriness were great. And finally I read The Life and Medieval Times of Kit Sweetly by Jamie Paxton, which I also listened to on audiobook and also gave 3 stars. This is another YA contemporary following our main character Kit, whose older brother, they both work at Medieval Times restaurant, and she desperately wants to be a knight, but there's a rule that only the men can be knights, and she's kind of trying to break that down. There's a little romance, like a friend to lovers romance here, but it's very backseat. Like, it's not a big focus of the story. It's mostly about the like becoming a knight and like getting freedom for all the women to do what they want to do in the Medieval Times show. And it also deals a lot with poverty. Her and her brother are living in poverty because their drug addicted father ran off with all their money and left them and their mum. So I really enjoyed that aspect. So there were some things that just were like factually got on my nerves, like they didn't quite work, which I talk about in my vlog, which should be coming out soonish. Like, I haven't quite finished it, but keep an eye out for that. And yeah, it was a 3 stars. It was good, but it wasn't perfect. And the narration didn't do it any favors for me because she had a very strong like breath sound and it irked me. So yeah, I gave this 3 stars as well. Alright, so those are all the books that I read in the month of July. Let me know what you read this month. If you read any of the things I read, or you've read them before and you'd like to chat about them with me, feel free to leave a comment down below. And otherwise, I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!